Would you be surprised more if the Nuggets didn't use the trade exception or kept both picks? Who among the Nuggets is likely to get moved this offseason? Plus, how would the Nuggets fare against this Boston Celtics team? Spoiler alert, the Celtics would turn the ball over to them a lot. This is Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Thanks for making this your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where you can join the show and be a part of the comment section, which is always lively and very interesting. Today's show is brought to you by Arcade 1UP. Bring home a slam dunk. Introducing the NBA Jam Shaq Edition from Arcade 1UP. Pre-order now to play with legends. Arcade 1UP is the place for authentic gaming experiences featuring licensed retro games from the golden age of arcades. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, joined by my co-host, my colleague, my buddy, my friend, Adam Mares on a Tuesday. Adam, how are you?
I'm good, man. It sounds like you're in a good mood. I'm excited for that.
When am I not in a good mood? Life is so wonderful. Unless you're into crypto yesterday. So let's go ahead and talk about, let's open the show. Today we're going to talk about, finish up our conversation on the trade that happened with the pick and the trade player exception and all that. We're going to talk a little bit more about trades in the second segment in terms of what I've heard about discussions around the league with the Nuggets. And then in the third segment, we're going to talk about the finals and how the Nuggets would match up at full strength, mind you, with this Boston Celtics Eastern Conference Championship team. Let's go ahead and start here. So yesterday we did a whole show on the trade that sent the 21st pick along with JaMychal Green. Not the 21st pick. It sent JaMychal Green and a 2027 pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder for the 30th and some seconds. Adam had a good question that I thought would make for a good discussion. What's your question, Adam?
Did you forget it?
I know it. I'm just letting you set it up.
Are you talking about which player is most likely to get moved? Is that the one?
No. So this one is, what would you be? What do you think would be a bigger failure? Is a strong word. Letdown, unfortunate event.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
How would you feel about the Nuggets if they didn't use the trade player exception? And how would you feel about the Nuggets if they kept both picks? Obviously, keeping both picks is not like a bad thing. But let's start there. If the Nuggets did not find a move for the 21st or the 30th pick, if they didn't do anything else, if they just went in the draft night, they picked a wing at 21, they pick a big at 30, and that's their night. How would you feel about the trade after that decision-making process?
So that's what's interesting about all this is this move does feel like it's the first move of many, as David Griffin would call a tapestry of moves to come. It does feel like this is a setup. I mean, the whole thing when we graded this or kind of talked about what it means, it was this gives them flexibility. But what's the point of flexibility if you don't use that flexibility? So first, we could break it down into two parts. One, like you said, would they use both picks? And two, would they use the trade of player exception? The second one's easier to answer, but we'll start with the first one. I would be shocked, and I think a little bit disappointed if they used both picks. In large part because depending on what other moves they make, I don't see a path to two rookies getting minutes, as well as Zeke Naji, as well as Bones Highland, as well as fielding a competitive roster. So if you think about if next year's team, you're trying to win a championship, does that happen with two rookies playing Zeke Naji plus Bones as four of the top 9 guys? I just don't see it. So if that's the case, then you probably have somebody that's a long-term prospect. When are they going to get on? I just think it would be very likely, not a certainty, but very likely to turn into a Jared Vanderbilt situation where even if they are a good player or a useful player, they wouldn't get the opportunity to become that for the Nuggets.
Yeah, it's this delicate balance because you want this pipeline of talent as guys get better. You want to be able to backfill, or if a guy does move on or you need to clear something or something doesn't work out, those type of things. And you want the depth. We saw this season with all the injuries, how important that depth is. And so you need young players in order to fill that. At the same time, young players usually are not typically, there are always exceptions to this. There's lots of exceptions to this, but typically young players are not ready to compete for a championship.
Right.
Meaning there's so many young players on both teams. Like Jonathan Kuminga was essential, in my opinion, to the Warriors run, and he hasn't played the finals.
I thought he might, honestly, like coming into the playoffs, because they played him so much, down the stretch, second half of the regular season. I kind of thought like he might be a Tyler Hero-esque piece that is like an impact guy, but can't get on the floor. And I think it's the right move, even with as compromised as Golden State can be in certain configurations. It's just like, as good as he is, he can't play. So to me, I look at it, I really think if we need like data of this, how many young rookies are on teams that make the Final Four, meaning the conference finals. I honestly think that number would be shockingly low. And then you talk about taking two guys, not just one, but two. That's even more. And then on top of that, you've got Bones, who's a young guard. You've got Zeke, who's a young forward. Are you drafting a young center? Or are you drafting somebody that's probably going to be behind those guys? Or maybe equally as bad, passing those guys and pushing them down a list and depleting and diminishing those players in terms of what their value is down the road. So to me, I would be, I think, pretty shocked and disappointed if they've drafted him. Again, this is like making grades on draft night. Maybe 4 years from now, you draft two players, and all of a sudden those those two players are really valuable. But my gut would tell me if they used both picks, it would be a disappointment.
We kind of talked about this yesterday, but the trade player exception. So what is your feeling on if they were to use the trade player exception, if they were not to use the trade player exception, if it just expired, how would you feel about that?
That would be really disappointing. That would be the move that I think you look at and say it'd be hard to defend it, the trade, as more than just a salary dump. I mean, you did get assets back, so it's not like you didn't get something, but it would be one of those where you would look at it and just question, are they trying to make the most of this title window? Are you really willing to spend the money? Because the Kroenkes having a $50 million luxury tax bill is a big one. But if you're trying to win a championship, it's an expected one. And if you were trying to get up below that and save $20 million, to me, that would be pretty crazy. One of the questions I have, and I actually it's funny with the CBA, I always come up with new questions, but I'm curious when that TPE expires. I thought it was typically like 1 year. So it could be one of those things where maybe they go into the season not having used it, but plan to use it later down the road. I don't know. I'd have to look into that.
I believe it's 1 year during the pandemic for various reasons, but my understanding has always been that it expires in a year. We'll see.
Maybe Bronco Squatch is watching. He's sometime in the chat here. He can clarify that.
Yeah. Happy birthday, Robert Rodarte, by the way. Shout out to him. So,
what about you?
My only thing on the trade player exception is that oftentimes it doesn't get moved because of the complications of using it for a number of reasons. Right. And hey, look, just to say this, like if it saves them some money for a year, which helps them double down later, I think that's fine.
Aren't we past that though, Matt? Like part of me is this seeing around the corner is just so hard. Because I would have agreed with you a year ago, maybe even 2 years ago, but we're at the point now where I'm like, why? Like if you can't make it happen now, why do I have confidence you'll make it happen next year?
Yeah.
The window's wide open. It's as wide open as it gets.
I'm trying to be the open to the rich people thing that you were talking about yesterday, open to the owners, like trying to be considerate of their spending. Maybe they'll open it up more to get somebody else for the Rams. Who knows? So, all right, we're going to come back. There's a lot of comments in the chat, and I want to set this up this way. There's a Bleacher Report article that talked about them targeting a point guard, which everyone was like, that was weird. I'll tell you why it's not weird. We'll do that when we come back. But first, I want to say about Arcade 1UP. Boom shakalaka. I've always wanted to do that. We've got big news. The only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1UP, the leader in home arcade games, is not only ever back, but they made it bigger than ever with a wait for it Shaq Edition machine. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that once again play hoops with NBA legends in the Arcade Classic. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digital NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade 1UP is the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee. I am a Golden Tee boss. I used to play it all the time when I was working in bars and in my early 20s. Many other starters just at $399. Check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. Just enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number 1, up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win NBA Jam Shaq edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with? Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for making this part of your day and your first listen each and every day. The Ultimate NBA Mock Draft starts June 16th with over 50 insiders. Nothing equals the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. We've got the Locked On NBA Big Board Draft experts, plus the Odyssey insiders. First pick is June 16th. Search Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and follow now so you don't miss a pick. All right, Adam. So a report this morning from Bleacher Report that we were looking for, that the Denver Nuggets were targeting a point guard. There's been conversations. I reported last week that Will Barton and Monte Morris have been made available in conversations. That's from around the league. Here was one thing that was surprising to me. Here's how I'll say this. I heard from 2 people in other front offices that Bones Highland was being used as a potential sweetener, that was at least available on the board for conversation. The Nuggets are definitely not shopping Bones Highland, but they're open to those conversations. I followed up on that because that seems like something that the Nuggets would want to squash and be like, no, we're committed to the young guy. No, it's possible. It's entirely possible that Bones Highland could get moved, which would explain the point guard thing, right? Like if you move one of them, you probably want to get another one because you want to have 3 point guards, and we don't expect Facu Campazzo to be on the squad next year. So if that's the case, and Austin at this point is more of like a defensive combo guard. So that kind of makes a little bit more sense if they're looking to target a point guard with one of the picks. I would say it's also likely that they get a point guard back in one of the trades if they were to pull that off. The reality is that if you ask the player that is most valuable for them to move, that they can move right now, the player with the most talent that they can move right now, that isn't one of the guys that's untouchable for them, it's Monte Morris. Reliable backup point guard, veteran presence at this point, knows how to get things organized. We'll get to the Celtics in the third segment. The Celtics could really use Monte Morris. Like, he would really help them.
So that's it. But this is the thing I want to kind of pause you here. Let's go to the Final Four again. Let's go to the finals. Steph Curry is not really a point guard. I know he is in today's NBA, but he is not a traditional style point guard. His value is different. Like, it's a pick and roll or really running off screens, this or that. Like, he's great. His impact it can't be questioned. But he's not the traditional point guard we're talking about. The Celtics don't have one. Marcus Smart sometimes plays a point guardy role, but they really just don't have one. They have a lot of good playmakers. You go down to Dallas, they have Jalen Brunson, who runs pick and roll. He's a pick and roll player, but really Luka Doncic is their point guard, and it's a little bit different. And then you go to the other side, like Kyle Lowry was pretty disappointing, throughout the playoffs this year. He would be the guy that you would look at there. I'm a big believer. George Karl had really convinced me this, like, over my years talking to him about how important a point guard is. But sometimes you have to look at some of the trends. And I know it's not the same for everybody. Every team's a little bit different, but it does look to me a little bit like the point guard spot. Teams have found this wing defense is almost more valuable than a point guard if you have playmaking in other spots, especially if you have a lot of guys who can make plays. That seems to be at least one trend that we should be looking at in this playoffs, don't you think?
Yes. I'll say yes. I think you need to have somebody that can get the offense organized.
No question.
Draymond Green does that for Golden State.
Yep.
Draymond Green does that a lot with Golden State.
They also have a lot of smart guys that don't fall out of rhythm as much as most teams.
Yeah. Jimmy Butler, I think, does that a lot for the Heat. And honestly, one of the Heat's problems, I think, was Kyle Lowry. Like, their offense was poor because Lowry was not able to do what he's done in the past. And so
too old, yeah.
I think that's part of it. You're right. Look, I'll say this. I think that position has become more and more extinct in large part thanks to Steph Curry. And that's not like something to blame Curry for. It's just that everyone looked at that and went like, hey, why do we worry about having someone who can set up an offense and run things? Why don't we have a guy that can shoot from 35 feet?
I think the real question isn't even that, though, Matt. I think it's more about point guards tend to be a little bit smaller. And is it worth what you lose defensively having one? Like, is it more important to have as many 6'7" and above guys who can guard and move than it is to have a point guard? And if you could have both, like if you have a 6'7" point guard that can guard, like, oh, that's the perfect thing. All right, you check all boxes. But it might be more valuable to say we have no weaknesses on defense. We have guys that can do this all across the board and switch and do this, than it is to say we have a guy that can do what you're saying, get you organized. Again, you have to be able to do that, but maybe you lose a little bit of that because you have Jokic and you've got a Murray and you've got some other pieces that can do this. That might be one of the things we have to learn from this run. I don't know.
The Bucks are a great example of this, honestly, right? So they trade their wing depth. They trade Dante DiVincenzo and Rodney Hood. They let PJ Tucker walk in free agency. Okay. Yeah. They trade those two guys, Dante DiVincenzo and Rodney Hood, to pick up another big at the deadline, which meant that they were very, very, very thin on the wing. Chris Middleton gets hurt. They had a true point guard in Drew Holiday, but now their wing depth is compromised, and they wind up losing to Boston. Now, a lot of that's just because Boston's defense, and they needed a guy that could create his own bucket in Chris Middleton. But at the same time, Drew's value has never really been higher than Chris's. And that does kind of show you, even as good as Drew Holiday is. So that kind of shows you the differential there.
Their proof of concept might have worked if Middleton didn't get hurt. In fact, seeing how the playoffs worked out, I kind of think so.
Yeah, me too. But you risk this with the injury thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the whole thing. That's why you said, like, have as many 6'7", 6'5", 6'7" guys as you can get. Is this creates? There's certain things where you don't want redundancy, and there's certain areas where you do. I do think that's an interesting question that somebody kind of posted in the comment section, which is, the redundancy question that you brought up with Monte Morris and Bones Highland. Is that a good redundancy, or is that a bad redundancy? Is that a redundancy that you can probably live with one of them? And the answer is probably with Jamal, you don't need three guys, right, of that level. And I think Bones, would you agree Bones is closer to Jamal than he is to Monte Morris stylistically?
I think so.
So if that's the agreement, then the kind of question, if you have, I always am kind of looking for, I want to be able to basically run, like, I either want to run a completely different style with my second unit, or I want to run like a B version of it with my second unit, right? And so I think if you have Bones, I think that does open up. I think that opens up Monte. I want to be clear on this with Bones. They would only move him if it was like they were making what they feel is a substantial move, right? I don't know that the idea that you're going to get a star is accurate. Like, I don't think somebody's going to be like, yeah,
Bones is the most valuable piece of this, especially when you start talking about traded player exceptions and the shit. Like, he's the most valuable piece because every team in the NBA wants Bones Highland, including the Nuggets. Like that. But that's when we talk about the hard decisions. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying, would you get more value out of trading Monte or trading Bones? I think it'd be out of trading Bones. That's the piece that people are going to be like, yeah, that guy, we really want that guy.
I agree. If we were to say that we expect one, I would still say that I expect Monte to be moved. That's my expectation too.
Yep.
I think Monte is most likely to move, but it does very much seem like because Monte has proven so valuable that now he has to be traded, because if they're going to improve in other areas, he's their best ticket to that.
And that's the thing. When you talk about redundant skill sets, I actually don't think it's redundant because it's a thing that you can't have too much of, like playmaking, shooting, just this offensive versatility. What I'd say is that it comes at the expense of something that's so much valuable. So if you had redundant offensive talents, but they were also great defensively, you'd say, great, that's perfect. We got the best of everything. What it is it comes at the same expense of Monte and Bones. Neither one of those guys are probably going to provide the exterior defense that you need. So, okay, we can cash in one of those offensive weapons for more defensive, stability.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about the Boston Celtics, and both of us have things to vent, I think, about the Boston Celtics and the NBA Finals. We'll do that when we come back on Locked On Nuggets. But first, I've got to tell you about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's impossible for your local auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. You're going to deal with a bunch of intimidating questioning, and you're going to have to wait behind while the person behind the counter orders the parts, choosing only the brand their warehouse happens to carry. You've got computers with rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You can shop for what has the best ratings, you want all of those things. You're going to save time and money when using Rock Auto. They're a family business serving do-it-yourselfers up to 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every customer. They don't have a different price for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Everybody gets the same price at Rock Auto. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car, truck. Write Locked On in their How'd You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for making us part of your day and your first listen each and every day. Make sure that you check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course those big boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. All right, final segment here with Adam Mares. Last night, the Golden State Warriors take a 3-2 lead over the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals, and the Celtics look out of gas. They also look a little bit solved, and they've responded so well in these playoffs. They were 7-0 coming in after a loss in the playoffs. They are now 7-1. What is
the trend
your
breaks?
What is your big takeaway from the Warriors win over the Celtics in Game 5?
What is my big takeaway? Well, here's my number one takeaway that I think I have so many takeaways from this, but one of them is a competitive series, which this one is. One of the things that is underrated about it is how much it pushes teams to be the best version of themselves, or at least to be aiming for it. Like, you push teams to their limit and they have to adjust and raise their level of play. And when I'm watching that one, I know we're going to talk about turnovers and missed shots and all of that stuff. This missed shots in particular is just sort of like acts of nature. You just can't, sometimes you can't control whether you make or miss open shots. It's just variance. But I still think that these two teams are just so impressive in terms of their defensive versatility, how locked in they can be on that end, and how much energy they put there. And I don't think it's, in part, quite a coincidence that the offensive ends were so sloppy because of how much focus and energy was expended on the defensive end.
The Boston Celtics are extremely frustrating for me. They're just extremely frustrating for me. That was probably the last time in this NBA season I'm going to bet a side. And this is not to lament about a bet that I made.
Yeah, we're both wrong. We both had Celtics in 6, so we both
it's more to lament the fact that I took so much grief from Boston fans about suggesting, like, I didn't even say, like, hey, you need to trade Smart. I was like, no, you can keep Smart, but you need to get a floor general. And they, like, jumped on my head about it. And I'm just like, watch your offense, man. Like, watch your offense.
Yeah.
Like, they have nobody to get them organized. These turnovers are killing them. Like, they lost, like Curry does not hit a 3. All of these things go their way. The Celtics had controlled the glass. They had problems in the paint. That's true. Like, the Warriors scored 50 points in the paint and shot 67% inside for 2. But, like, that game was winnable. And Boston just gave it to them. Like, just was like, whoop. And that sloppiness just absolutely kills me. This is, we talked in the last segment about how the league is moving away from this. And it's frustrating for me because this is one of the things I've said, people have been like, well, who? And I'm like, that's a good question. Like, there's not that many of these point guards out there anymore, because everybody's moved towards, I'm going to come off a pick and roll at 35 feet and throw up a 3. And it's frustrating for me because I'm like, I just want someone to get the ball and be like, hey, you go over there, go over here. Let's get a good shot. Let's get a good shot here.
Here's the thing, though, about when teams are at this level, because I understand what you're saying about Marcus Smart. Like, he's a pretty – the Celtics have a lot of frustrating players because they have guys that can do a lot but can't do some of the, like, maybe more obvious stuff that you almost take for granted. Smart can do so many things, but you're right that he has nights where he just looks like – I mean, he's not a point guard some nights. He's just not that. But what I would say is that, again, the NBA is so tough right now. It's so tough because there's just so many different – there's not the juggernaut team and there's so many good teams that concept for them worked. This is like defense heavy, and then you have some great shot makers, and then you have a bunch of guys who are going to pick up the slack for a lack of traditional point guard play. But then you get up against the top defense in the NBA and the Golden State Warriors, and they're just so smart. The way they've walled off the paint, especially for Jason Tatum. And now it's like, okay, you don't have that elite shot making. Like, now you're going to have to actually score maybe in what you were calling, more traditional ways, and seems like should be more easy ways. But again, they're constructed in a way to do something. The Warriors have finally been the first team that has really, truly taken that away from them. And their offense looks their already unimpressive offense now looks even more unimpressive. So to me, this is the challenge with the Nuggets. You have to be built to do so many different things, or you have to be so good that every team can't stop you. And one thing I will say that's encouraging about this year, I think 2 years ago after the Western Conference Finals run, a lot of teams adjusted their roster just to have an extra center on staff. Like, hey, if we go up against Jokic, we got to have a backup center. It's the only reason we need this player. I look at it now like the Suns punting on Ayton or potentially punting on him. That was a one team that had a guy that actually was like, hey, it's a good matchup for Jokic, but maybe it's a weaker matchup for Golden State. I feel like a lot of teams, especially out West, are almost for pushing the Nuggets aside as a lower priority. And it might actually work out where Denver now is the counter punch to everybody else's punch.
I agree with that. I also, when you were talking about that, my other thought was, what if they're doing a lot of this as approach Curry in this series, where it's like, look, we're not going to stop Jokic. We got to live with Jokic, but we can stop the rest of the Nuggets. And that's why it's going to be so important for Jamal and MPJ to get back to full health and for MPJ to take steps forward and Gordon to keep playing well and for them to hit this trade. Like, the rest of your team is going to have to be great. Like, no matter how good Jokic is, the rest of the team is going to have to be great. Because the rest of the Warriors are defensively. Like, they haven't even been offensively in this series, but they've been great defensively. And that's been their core identity since 2015. Like, I will never get over in 2015, they were the first team in NBA history to lead the league in defensive rating. They had the best defense in the league and played at the fastest pace. That was thought to be like impossible.
Right.
And instead, like, that's just a massive change. And so that's something to kind of consider as well.
But I think, again, I've always said this. I think those two things are connected. Like, when you have to constantly sprint back because they're such a good transition team, when you finally get a stop, you're like, let's walk it up. We're too tired. Let's play in the half court. Now your half court defense is better than transition defense. So I just think those things are connected with Golden State.
Yeah, and Golden State did a great job of speeding up the Celtics and getting them uncomfortable. Like, the Celtics were not comfortable from the jump last night. They looked shook. They looked taken aback. The Warriors got into them, and the Celtics couldn't recover. Even after taking a lead, it took too much energy for them to pull back into that game. Fully healthy. In a hypothetical universe where Jamal never suffers the ACL and MPJ, or they both come back, right? And they both come back 100%, which of course is impossible, but bear with me. If the Nuggets had faced the Celtics in the NBA Finals, what do you think of that matchup?
So it's an interesting one. I was talking with somebody with the team at practice yesterday, just kind of, sitting there in between availabilities. And they were adamant that that's a great matchup for Denver. That was like, hey, man, like, the Celtics are perfect. They don't have anybody to guard Jokic. There'll be compromise here. I guess I would say optimistic. I mean, the Celtics smashed this version of the Nuggets this year, 2 times, but they're completely different without MPJ and Jamal Murray. I tend to think it's a good series. I don't think there's anybody that can guard Jokic, and when you're compromised inside, maybe. Robert Williams is a little small. He blocks a lot of shots, but he's a little bit undersized. I think over the course of a series, Jokic would figure him out. The combination of Al Horford and Williams, I don't know. I probably tend to lean Celtics and disagree with the person I was talking to with the Nuggets, in large part because I just think the Celtics are so versatile defensively and they can do so many different things. But I don't know. It's an interesting sort of – I think that one more than any other team you could throw out is an interesting one to think about.
It is a really interesting matchup. I still lean Celtics just because I've got to see Denver be able to play defense at a high level. Yeah. Not like, oh, they were top 10 for a while. Like, I need to see like the Denver Nuggets 10 defense. Like, I have to like that's the bar. Because they do have enough guys that can get off the dribble to score, and they shoot a ton of threes, right? And Denver was giving up those, and so for me, like, I have to see, especially with where all at in his career, all contextualized. Like, if we're looking forward to next season, and MPJ especially, just like, I'm gonna have to see Denver show that they can play defense at that level to believe that they can get there, because Boston may have a flawed offense that can be slowed down, but you have to make it tough for them. And I don't know if the Nuggets can. That's better defensively. But offensively, I love the matchup and think that they could really do. They could do some.
What do you think about, though, my theory here? Like 2 years ago after that run. So here's what happens is you go back 2 years and you have, the Nuggets come back from 2-3-1 deficits. They get up against the Lakers, and even though I think that series, if Anthony Davis misses that shot, is probably at the very least a 6-game series, obviously, and it's a little bit closer than people think. But what they had was Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard. And Dwight Howard was the guy that made a huge impact in that one, the second body you could kind of throw at him. And I think there was a shift that summer where you saw, I think that was when Favors came back to Utah. Again, somebody that lost to Denver, and they're like, hey, we just need another body that we can throw at. We're going to have to go through Jokic in the division and in the playoffs. And I thought you saw that. And then you get to the playoffs, and you have Portland, who didn't have a backup center. Famously, they had to play Carmelo Anthony at center. Jokic just murders them in the non-Nurkic minutes. And I think that there was something there. But with the Nuggets falling off of the radar because they weren't competitive, I look around the league and I go, who has the bodies to match up with Jokic in a playoffs? And which teams seem to be concerned about addressing that? There might be a real, we have to beat the Warriors. The Warriors are back. That's the new team. Like, we have to beat Luka. Luka's not going anywhere. And I just wonder if all these teams are going to swerve away from Denver, and there's an opportunity there for Denver to be like nobody planned for us. You're going to really go into a series with Frank Kaminsky as the guy that you were going to count on to stop Jokic? Like, okay, like, let's do that.
I think that's a really good point. I think watching Dallas, I think, is a good bellwether because they're the team that most obviously needs a real rim roll threat. So to see if they double down on small ball or if they find a big, I think that's important. Portland, I think, is another one that's going to be interesting to watch as they try and reconfigure a team to really make a run around Dame, because that's what they're actually trying to do. Trying to think what the other West teams are. Memphis, I think, probably has the bodies, right? I think they're probably like, it's not ideal for us, but we have Steven Adams and we have Xavier Tillman.
Memphis,
and we have Jaren Jackson.
That's a good point.
We have enough to probably handle. Golden State, I think, is banking on Wiseman. So for them, it's more just a matter of like they have a sunk asset that they have to reconfigure anyway. And then you go up and down. Whoever like rises next year, it'll be interesting. But yeah, like honestly, part of it though, man, is after how he played versus Draymond in those last 3 games, I really am at the point of just like, I think trying to counter Jokic is a fool's errand. I think you just need to focus on like, hey, if we can shut down the rest of the Nuggets and score, that's our path. Because like, I don't know that there's anything that they can do versus Joker in terms of scoring. You can try and shut down his assist, and that to me seems like the best way to go about it is, okay, he may have 40, we'll make him work for it, but we're going to shut down all these other guys.
This is why him and Steph are such interesting comps. And I even feel like last night, they didn't like correct really hard. I didn't think the Celtics in going, but they did correct a little bit. I mean, there were, I think, the most assists since game 1 for the Warriors. Like, I think it was only 24 or something like that. So it wasn't a ton, but they've only been having about 20. Some other guys did get going. I don't think that was the main story, but it was a little bit of it. So I do think that him and Jokic have that same thing where it's like you kind of have to decide how you're going to guard him, because you can't guard both. You have to sort of pick and hope you hold up well enough against one or the other. So I don't know. Like, I still think if I was another team, I'm just so curious if other teams are thinking about Denver as they plan their rosters. And by the way, when we talk about plan their rosters, the Ayton is the only player. Maybe you could say Nurkic as well, because we'll see what happens with Nurkic. But those 2 players are the ones that you look at that say those are specifically valuable there. But it's more about, do you spend the 13th roster spot? Do you, in other words, waste a roster spot that has no value against the Mavs, no value against any other team except for Denver? Do you do that and bring in Bismack Biyombo's too small. Like, he's not the type of guy. Do you just bring in somebody that takes up probably a little bit of salary and a roster spot for one series?
Some final notes. Just to wrap up here really quickly. Somebody asked in the comments about the protections on the 2027 pick that was sent out in the trade. It is protected 1 through 5 for 3 years and then turns into a second.
What's nice about that, so I hadn't heard that. 1 through 5 is interesting because if you look at it, if just some simple math here, if Jokic stays in Denver through the next entirety of his next contract, I think he retires after the 28 season or maybe 29 season. So you're talking about the 2 final years of Jokic's career plus 1 more being top 10 protected is like really nice, because they might actually be a bottom 5 team that 3rd year. So I guess there's a chance there, but it'll probably almost certainly convey in 2027. I suspect Jokic will still be around there, and there's just almost no way you are a bottom 5 team with Jokic on your roster.
Yeah. So I agree with that. So that's the protections on that pick. And there's something else I was going to mention. MLS just inked a new deal where all of their games are going to be on Apple Plus, all of them. So even the local games are going to be on Apple, which is a massive deal, and it sets a precedent for these sports leagues to ink these deals with major streaming providers, which of course would solve the altitude problem. So thanks for thinking about that as another wrinkle in the ongoing rights issue. As we get out of here, make sure that you are subscribing to Locked On Avalanche, because the Colorado Avalanche tomorrow begin the Stanley Cup Finals. My wife's a wreck. I'm like, are you excited? And she's like, I'm nervous. Like, she's just a wreck right now. But go Avs. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Give us those 5-star reviews. Helps us out so much. Subscribe on YouTube. Best way for you to support the show. Directly helps us. Subscribe to the show. And you get to join all these awesome people in the comments today, like Kyle Lynch and Leo Clayman and Hurricane, who's always in here, and Tu Meridu and Igor and Markovich and all these folks that have been in the chat today. Really appreciate it, guys. Good comment section today. Enjoyed it. Adam, have yourself a great day. Listeners, you have yourselves a great day. We'll see you guys again tomorrow on Locked On Nuggets.